Welcome back to another episode of the Security Champions podcast. I'm your host, Michael Birch. I'm also the Director of Application Security here at Security Journey. Today, I am joined with Jason Haddix. He has 15 years in cybersecurity roles, serving as the CISO of Ubisoft, the head of Trust and Security Operations at Bugcrowd, Director of Penetration Testing at HP, and the lead penetration tester at Redspin. Jason is a hacker and bug hunter to the core, ranking in the 51st all-time Bugcrowd leaderboards. And he's also been at many different conferences and talks such as DEF CON, BlackHat, OWASP, RSA, NullScon, and SANS. And now we are honored to have him here today as a guest. But rather than my little read off blurb, I think, Jason, how about you tell us what has led you to your security journey to kind of become the hacker CISO of our industry?
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know the intro is a pretty long one, but yeah, I mean, I got started in security in my early 20s, I would say. And so that dates me a little bit. But I actually started in a little bit of the darker side. My origin story is one of I wanted to go into the bars basically when I was 20, and my friends were 21. My friend group was older than me, and so I bought a fake ID from one of my friends and got busted with it, at one of the bars trying to, drink. And so I got really angry at the fact that I knew this fake ID was, it was pretty bad, right? The production quality was not great. And so I, figured, well, I could probably do it myself. I'm an enterprising young person, and so I fell into what was then the first version, like, version 1.0 of the dark web, on forums like Carter's Market and Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew. And that's where I got a little bit of exposure to kind of how the underground works, the precursor to what exists today. And so there's different groups of tribes on the underground. There is the Carters, who are physically cashing out with fake credit cards, and then there are the people who make the fake IDs to match the fake credit cards, and then there are the people who hack other people or corporations to provide them with the dumps, the credit card numbers. And so I got exposed to some of the hacking part on those forums, learned a little bit, and then shortly after I took an elective just by happenstance at my community college, and it was called Ethical Hacking and Network Defense. I thought it sounded cool. I'll check it out. It was the first class of its kind to be offered, at any really school I had seen. I was doing Cisco networking at the time, and on my path to be an admin, and so I took this course, and I was telling my teacher, hey, this is like already old stuff. The stuff you're teaching in this course, like back orifice, is already 3 years old. The stuff in this course book is really old. The tools are really old. The techniques are really old. There's nothing about web hacking in here. It's all network-based, old school Stack Overflows, and we already had new mitigations coming out. And so he was like, you're really knowledgeable in this. You can do this as a career, right? And I was like, no way, really? And so he told me about, the penetration testing world, and that it was, pretty burgeoning, and you can do that as a career. And so ever since then, it was kind of my life's mission, right? I modeled myself after Dan Kaminsky, who was the director of penetration testing at IOActive for a long time, who is a hero of mine, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to run pen test teams. I wanted to be a world-class pen tester. And that blossomed from what the old definition of pen tester used to be, from mostly network-based stuff to application security, mobile security. And then, after doing that and being able to present and speak and put together a good PowerPoint, I started to transition into leadership a little bit more. People wanted, different advice and stuff like that. And so, over the course of my career, I moved into more leadership positions, building those teams. But I never wanted to let go of the hacker vibe. So I still hack to this day. I still run with the hacker crowd and the bug hunter crowd. And so now I'm leading our red team at Butterbot. And so we're doing full scope red teaming, but we're trying to bring it to the mid-market because we believe everybody deserves, that type of adversary kind of challenge, and to understand, how people can get in from the outside. And so, we hope we're evolving kind of the pen testing into more of a red teaming vibe for people, and they can get our service, and a time when really a lot of people are struggling to fit that kind of testing into their budget. So, with the recession and everything like that.
So I love the stories where people a lot of the people that, my favorite guests, and kind of the same way I got origin to this, is people that kind of fell into these roles and kind of just like, oh wait, discovered it. Like one of my old CEO, right? He just found a line where somebody was like, hey, we're teaching this, come do this at our scene. And he just jumped in the line and was like, okay, I'll try it out, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many stories of that. I mean, even mine similarly, right? So prior to being in tech, I was a medic.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I was a special forces medic prior to getting out and pursuing cyber, right? So easy transition, right? What got me into this space though was there was a training opportunity, and they're like, hey, go take this specialized training. The whole specialized training was we were getting ready to go do some operations in Africa, and they're like, hey, you need to be able to communicate and send money and do things without anybody else knowing you're doing it, right? We need to do it kind of clandestinely.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent me to this like tech class, and I sit down and they're like, okay, we're gonna install Linux, and we're gonna teach you how to do steganography. We're gonna teach you what cryptocurrency is. We're gonna start teaching you all these other like secure communications on how VPNs work and setting up all these things so that you can securely kind of like operate and do stuff out there. And this was my first taste of it, right? So what happened to me? I went home and I re-imaged all my Windows computers to Linux, and then I never got off the command line since, right? Like that was my taste. I just needed a taste of it, and the moment I saw it, I was like, I'm in love. This stuff is fun, right? It's exciting.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, those scenarios that lead us down those roads, it's just kind of when the door opens, and if you walk through it, you're lucky enough,
That's why I think cyber is such a cool... I hate when I actually abbreviate cyber, but like cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is such a unique field because you can come into it from, these crazy adjacent, things, but the common factor is not how technical you are. I mean, sometimes it is. We have really great technical people, but other times it's your creativity, it's your ability to communicate, it's your ability to parse a lot of different information and come to strong conclusions about a defense or an offense or how you would protect or defend, and you can come from all over the place. It's so cool, and honestly it allows for lifelong learning, which I can't say that about every career, right? I know a lot of careers you can plateau. I'm always feeling like I am a lifelong learner in information security, and I will be for the rest of my life. So
yeah, especially this field, information security. I'll be honest. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above the water more than anything else. I don't feel like I'm getting close to the top. I feel like the water's rising and I'm just treading, right? It's the amount of stuff that's just constantly coming up and changing, and throwing the new stuff, right? Like right now we're in not AI is new, but the public accessibility of AI has greatly increased in the recent times, and that's completely changed the landscape. Like the way people are building attacks, the way people are trying to think of defending or writing code even, like it's all changing right now in a very fluid manner, and in like 2 years it's going to be a completely different world.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done a couple of podcasts really recently talking specifically about AI and how it's going to change security. It's going to be a massive disruptor in how we do things, and it's going to be part of every business, right? Every business is rushing to implement, their services. Well, they're rushing to do two things, right? They're rushing to figure out how to consume all of their internal data to make their business more powerful or more profitable, and then they're also rushing to build AI-assisted APIs and services for their customers to, further that profit. And so, the world's going to look like, LLM-powered services everywhere, and now it introduces a whole new attack plane. It's very similar to like maybe 8 or 9 years ago when I transitioned from strictly applications into mobile, right? We were now hacking a little bit of some different stuff with iOS and Android, and attacking mobile apps and attacking the phone software, and so I feel very similarly right now about the attack surface that the consumerism and this generation of AI is going to bring to business and consumers. And like you said, too, people are using it to write code, which that code is not always secure. So we take a couple steps backwards, right, a little bit when you're unless you deliberately try to use it to write secure code. And so it's at the same time, it's both a tremendous tool for humanity, right? It gives people access who have never been able to program anything or do certain things in their life, gives them access to do those things, which is a net good. But it also, doesn't have guardrails yet, and so we take some steps backwards as well.
Yeah, I think it's powerful. There's a lot of companies that I think, though, the interesting thing we're going to see is there's so many companies that I think they're going to be afraid to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
That they're going to start adopting AIs in ways that maybe they shouldn't, or not putting, like you said, not putting in those security controls, so that it's going to lead to some other stuff. Like I love the ability. So for me, I'm a content creator, right? I work in security. And a lot of the things I do is I look at, hey, I need to generate vulnerable code on purpose now and then, right?
Yeah.
And I need to do it in new and creative ways for my learners to see different things. Using AI to help me come up with some of those base concepts are great. But the way I see this, and I've kind of equated this in previous conversations, this is kind of like the new Stack Overflow, right?
Yeah.
So Stack Overflow is great. You can go in there, you can read a lot, you can learn what other engineers are doing. But if you just copy and paste what somebody else does and throw it in your code base without really knowing what's going on, you have a huge potential for adding some severe vulnerabilities into your code base, right?
Yeah.
Same with ChatGPT. Like, it can give you some super great functional stuff, but if you don't really know what's going on and you don't read through it and understand the security concerns before you use it, you could be opening yourself up to some serious vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the great resources here is, there's a couple projects just starting to come out, right? As it does when, like new tech like this comes out. But the OWASP top 10 for LLMs came out a few weeks ago, and it's in version alpha. So it talks about all the vulnerabilities that can take place in the LLM ecosystem and the AI and ML ecosystem. MITRE has Atlas, which does threat modeling of ML systems, and then Daniel Miessler wrote this blog about the attack surface of AI as it's integrated into our everyday life. And I actually think that's one of the best resources so far, because what he does is he illustrates where he thinks businesses and us personally will integrate AI into our lives, where it makes the most sense as humans to help us, right? And we will do all these things. And then he writes about what the attack surface is for each of these things and what the risk is in each step. And that the idea that a company will rush to market and start building, AI-enabled services, in order to do this, they're going to have to basically create these giant data lakes, or they're going to have to integrate multiple different internal services to create the context that they want to make these great services. And that just means that the LLM has access to those things, a lot of times unfettered access. And that means that, you can use the LLM as a pivot point to hack into internal data, right? Like, I shouldn't be able to get to your HR system, but in order to answer those great questions that your chatbot is answering for your clients, it had to have access to that data, it had to be trained on it, or it has to have live access to the API. Can I ask your service using natural language in a creative way to give me someone else's data out of that data set, or data that I'm not supposed to have out of that data set? Can I ask it to access other parts of your internal infrastructure? And the amazing thing about this is not only the attack surface, but how it changes offensive security a little bit. It blows my mind. Instead of, the vehicle for all of this is prompt injection right now. It's one of the vehicles to hack these things. And what prompt injection is just asking fancy questions, right? And like, it has changed from me being, like you said, on a Linux terminal, right? Putting in, complex code or scripting something or putting in apostrophes or, or like doing something and encoding it, to asking English language questions to hack something, which is really interesting. Like, to me, it's a weird way that hacking has come, but it's awesome. It's cool to check out. So
yeah, I was definitely, I found it pretty hilarious the way that people started doing when ChatGPT became the big thing, right? And everyone was going in and like, how can I break your current security controls?
Yeah.
Because right now you're saying, oh, well, we can't answer questions like that. I'm like, yeah, but everyone out there, especially in our break fix, what I like to call a kind of hacker community, was like, oh yeah, but I bet you I can. And they did.
Yeah.
And they started getting all sorts of crazy, powerful responses that were not originally determined in that system. But I think the cool part about that from the security perspective is, at least that opened our eyes real quick, really early. You're like, oh, okay, so that this stuff is fragile right now, right?
Yeah.
Currently, we're in the stage of it being tested by the community. That's really where we are, right? Early test,
faster than we have before too, right? Yeah. I think we're getting to the security questions faster than we did with some other technologies too, because it's so disruptive. So that's good. That's good for us.
Yeah, I like I said, it's funny because a lot of people were like, I think, taken back by everyone going in and breaking. I'm like, no, that's the best thing you can do, right? Go in and break to show everybody what they need to go fix.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I could do a whole episode on AI stuff, man.
All right, well, I think before we dive into that, we got some other things to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break from our response, and then we'll kind of jump back in and hit the meat and core of this conversation.
You scan your network for vulnerabilities and the tests indicate all is well, so it should be secure, right? Think again. Automated scans only go so far. They can't keep up with rising attack frequencies, and they can't match the creativity of a targeted attack by an actual hacker. You need someone who's built to breach on your side. ButtoBot's highly skilled team of ethical hackers continuously simulate threats year-round, keeping you one step ahead of the adversary. Visit buttobot.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back to the Security Champion podcast. I'm here with Jason Haddix, and we're going to be covering a couple different conversations here. Kind of starting out with the idea of security champion programs. Now, Jason, you have a lot of industrial experience in a lot of different enterprises, looking and seeing how they've run different type of programs and what's kind of worked and not. I was wondering if you kind of share some of that experience of what you kind of like best about security champion programs.
Yeah, so from my experience, right, I've done a lot of consulting in my career. The majority of it was consulting, and so a lot of times you're in there as either a tester or like something like a vCISO, or you are the actual CISO and you get experience that way. But some of the best AppSec programs and the best security engineering programs, which is kind of a newer term, right? Like having a distinct security engineering team, at your organization, have come, by their success partially by having a security champions program. Because what it does is it's not even, sometimes I like to call it an intangible, but it's not even an intangible. It's a very tangible, but it embeds security ideals and just like the care and culture of security into development teams. And so some of the best examples I've seen are, companies like Riot is one of the ones I like to point out. So Riot Games makes League of Legends and Valorant. And so I come from the gaming industry, but I admired them before I was even in the gaming industry. But their security champions program is gamified internally to build in every product and development team a security champion, and they've written about it in blogs and presentations, all over the world. And these people inside of the organization, they get advanced training, which helps them in their career, right? They get some secure code training, they get secure library usage training, they actually get training budget applied to their job role that they wouldn't normally have, so they get to go to some conferences and stuff like that. And then they're responsible for helping development teams either through the stand-up or scrum process to identifying different threat models as piecemeal, or threat modeling as a whole meeting their applications. And so there's one per big development group, sometimes two depending on how big the development group is. And the way they gamify it is pretty dope. They have custom swag that you can only get if you're a security champion. It's I think they did League of Legends characters that were like support characters. So if you play that game, you understand that a support character is a character that out of a 5-person team, is going to do the healing and the support skills and the crowd control and stuff like that. And so they did that. They made custom graphics. They had different prizes. They had shirts, hoodies, challenge coins, stickers, all kinds of little tchotchkes. And they really made this group feel special and empowered. And they didn't just put it on them as an extra responsibility, right? What their idea was trying to bake security into the culture of every development team. And their main method was threat modeling and just having these people there, a small army. They did meetups. They introduced them to the wider security scene, like OWASP and localities. They would host those things. And so I have seen this model work, a couple times, really well. But you can't half do it, right? It's not, security champions program. If you half put effort into it and you leave, your inductees, the people who, either self-identify as interested in security or who you think would be good at it, if you leave them alone, the program, will atrophy and, you won't get the desired effect. So it requires management. And so, both at Riot and in my history, there was a part of the security group that was, completely dedicated to managing that program. And it can be usually one or two people to manage the security champions and to manage what their responsibilities are, to make sure that the program is properly gamified and they're getting something out of it rather than it just being an extra responsibility, to also to keep in contact with our AppSec people and understand what the secure defaults are and the guardrails that we want implemented, right? And how do we train them, and what is the best training for them to take next based on what we know about the different development teams. And so that's a little bit of my experience from kind of being next to Riot, having implemented some of that at Ubisoft, having consulted some places, and but the programs in general, super high speed, super powerful if you can get them going and working.
I think one of the best things you said there too is kind of what we're giving to those developers, in a sense, like identifying, right? How are we supporting them building out their careers and everything else? Because from talking to a lot of different industries and companies, a lot of the problems I've seen in the programs that don't do well is exactly that first part. It's like, well, here's an additional responsibility. Yeah. And go do it, right? We're great. You're glad you have a security interest. Now here's extra work, and then all of a sudden that's the person doing all the security work on your dev team. Like that. Yeah. That makes no sense, right? Nobody wants that. Like, great, you give me more work, like minimal reward, maybe a little recognition, but like a little more incentivizing. Also, the premise of that being your one security person on the team is a horrible premise, right? That's not the point of these programs.
Yeah. I mean, you can get that in a lot of iterations of embedding a security people in development teams. It is a little bit of the darker side of programs like this, right? Like whether you have a security engineering strike team that you deploy to development teams when they need security help, or whether you have a security champions program that identifies someone internally, or someone self-identifies themselves to be a security champion. If you're not shepherding the program correctly, they can get ostracized by their developer peers, because it's security in a lot of places who have fast-moving deadlines is considered extra work, and especially if a big vulnerability or a gap during the threat model gets found and it requires re-architecture of software, it is definitely extra work on everybody's plate. And so part of the training is not just how to use the guardrails, which should be one of the tenets of the security champions program, is you don't want to just go, have them go in there and be like, okay, we should care about security, and then put that responsibility on them as well as to research what secure is for their product, right? You have to give them the tools and the armor to go in there and be like, yes, for this type of thing, we're going to use this library, or for this type of thing, here's the method that we protect against this vulnerability. Here, you train them how to threat model, which there are some great trainings out there, nowadays, how to run either iterative threat modeling inside of your daily development process, or a standalone threat modeling meeting that happens quarterly or whatever, or per release cycle or something like that. So there's those methods, but you also have to teach them how to sell security as an enabler as well, because they're just not used to it, right? They're going to get this pushback from their peers, and it's like, yes, but if we take care of this now, and we've identified that it's a risk that will most likely get uncovered, and you start adding up these things, you're like, look what this could look like in 3 months, right? We have an exploit in our game, and the user base is going crazy, and it's on Twitter, and it's costing us millions of dollars of PR work as well. We can fix this in one sprint, and here's how we do it, and save ourselves a bunch of headache later, and here's how we do it in the future with less effort. And so these are all things you have to think about, letting these awesome people who are basically volunteering their time, you have to arm them with these tools. And then the other thing is that also you have to frame security as a beneficial thing for them personally. And what I always tell our security champions is like, hey, like, I have never seen a developer who puts security experience on their resume get paid less than just a regular developer. Like, if you say you have security experience in X framework, or just in general you've done these cybersecurity things, had this training, you've done threat modeling, you're going to earn 1.2, 1.5, maybe 2x of a general developer. And this is worth it for you to invest your time, in doing this. So, yeah.
So it's funny, because I'm a heavy security person on the side of things, I have a developer background, right? I was software developer before I got an AppSec. But that's the power there, right? You see that on both sides of this, right? You have the developers with the lack of the security knowledge, but when they add that security knowledge, their value goes through the roof, right?
Yeah,
On the same
absolutely.
side on AppSec, right? We have a bunch of AppSec engineers that are great engineers and know how to run tools, but they don't know how to code. But if you have the
Hmm.
AppSec people that know how to code, exponential on where it
Yep.
takes their career, right?
Oh yeah,
Both
both
sides
both
of the house
sides.
benefit from learning from each other, right?
Yeah, yeah. I see a lot of DevSecOps people now come from just DevOps, right? It's just like they just went through this giant transformation of learning both how to develop and stand up infrastructure quickly, and they cut their teeth on kind of a new way to implement software. And it's not a giant leap for them just to be like, okay, let's add security to this, right? And so it's like, okay, we're going to add security at the infrastructure layer or at the cloud layer or in the code or through the frameworks or whatever. And so a lot of them are opening themselves up really quickly to this idea of being a security champion or adding it to their resume of knowing some security stuff, which I think is awesome.
So, and here's my little bias as so I am a security training company. That's what I work for, right? We focus on training dev security. So I'm absolutely, yes, we need to train everybody's security so they can do it right the first time.
Yeah.
But to tie into that, something that you talked about, it's actually something, one of these projects I'm working on this year is identifying training that is specific to teach the individual security champions how to succeed in their role as a security champion. Because there's not a lot of that out there, right? It's a lot of in-house and like mentoring and like the people that are building the security champion program starting to kind of teach people a little bit, but there's not a lot of formal training out there that says here's how the day in the life of a security champion, how you can succeed for your organization. Part of that's hard because security champions in different organizations are different. But one of the big projects I'm working on this year is like how do we teach security champions, give them training to be champions, not just the security training, but how do we train you to be and give you the tools to be successful in that kind of role? Because I think there's a gap out there in kind of the general just documentation and guidance of like, hey, security champion, here's what you should do. Here's the guide.
Yeah.
Go pick it up and run.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever seen a methodology for strictly what a security champion executes on, what the skill set should be. I mean, I think it's like you said, it's told and it's taught by good ones, but I haven't seen much in the way of trying to codify it. So yeah, I mean, I think that the day in the life of a security champion is very similar to the day in the life of a developer, of which their full-time role will pretty much always be, right? You're never going to have a security champion whose full-time job is security champion, right? So like you have to outline like ways to communicate with their peers, right? You have to do a little bit of the kind of thing I talked about where you understand how to influence a project a little bit, so you have to teach some leadership skills. You have to arm them with the technical tools. You have to keep them trained. One of the things I really liked about a couple of our more successful security champions was the idea that every day at the stand-up they had just like a running visible board that basically had like past security vulnerabilities that they had run into and threat model gaps that they had run into to learn iteratively and be like, oh, let's make sure we don't repeat this mistake. Everybody could see it. So they kept iterative knowledge of where they had issues before, so that they didn't repeat or regress into issues. And yeah, I mean there's a lot that goes into it. That's why when you do a security champion program, I would say like it's probably only 1 out of every 4 people who even are who come to you self-identifying are really, really successful, right? Because it is a little bit of extra work. It does take some training. There is some social credit that gets traded sometimes to be this role, but I think overall it's very beneficial. So but yeah, I would say like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 like are really the really most effective ones I've seen. And other people can be effective in implementing things. They can run a threat model or whatever, but to really have someone who's baking it into the culture and the development process and able to influence peers is, I don't think I've really seen a training that's outlined the day-to-day. So that would be cool.
One of the things that I kind of see with the Champions program is like the sell of value is sometimes hard for organizations, right? But saying, hey, okay, what are we getting out of this program too? And one of the things I love to like leverage in some of your knowledge and what you see out there is you live a lot of the stuff when you think about the hacker, bug bounties, pen testing. It's kind of at the end of the life cycle, right? Where theoretically pre-going to production, or we're already in production, and we're testing and we're validating everything that's come through. Now the world is full of security tools. Like we have every scanning tool under the sun out there, and there's every flavor and type that's out there, right? You got RSAS, DIAS, IaaS, RASP agents, WAF, like throw it all together, right? We got and stack it. But even with all the security tools in the world out there that we put in to catch every vulnerability that everyone's missing, we're still wide open in so many different scenarios. So I feel like there's and I go to like RSA, good example, right? We both went to RSA. 90% of the talk was, I have a security tool that can solve all your problems, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what every banner said. Hey, our security tool can solve all your problems.
Yeah.
I don't believe any banner that I ever read that says that, right? Because it's ridiculous. The premise that you just plug and play and you're going to solve my problems just isn't real.
Yeah.
So where is the gap there, right? We have this heavy leaning on all these different high-tech security tools people are dumping a bunch of money in, but they're not being effective as the one way to kind of solve our problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different answers to that question. I'll start on both ends of them. So I'll start on the internal developer side and the security program side for a company, right? It's like okay, well, if you don't invest in security internally at the appropriate level, every security bug that you have that makes it out to production does cost more, right? There's a lot of graphs and there's a lot of papers that'll tell you, oh, it's like 5x or something like that. I don't know how people got to those numbers, right? But like, it is true that it costs you more to fix a bug that makes it to production, but not all bugs, right? It's not like, like headers on your, website are going to lead to a breach of your company, right? I mean, it is a security practice that should be followed, absolutely. And, you can chain together a lack of those headers with other vulnerabilities as an attacker to do things, right? But it is not as serious as like a SQL injection bug or some kind of RCE or something like that. And so, internally, you want to make sure that you get that cruft out of your applications, and so that's what you use the internal tools for in the pipeline, right? You're using your automated scanners, your source code scanners, even dynamic in the dev and deployment. And so yeah, I mean, I think that is the investment that you should get at, right? There is also me coming from an attacker point of view, and I think that somewhat, and this is a controversial opinion, but somewhat we have over-indexed on that side of the equation, because when you look at the breaches that happen and you analyze as actual breaches of the company that cause downtime and theft of IP, it's not predominantly AppSec vulns. It is attacking humans and credentials, and leveraging bad cloud configurations, which I guess you could consider AppSec, right? But the majority of it is attacking through a different way. And so, one of the things that the reason why I left Ubisoft was because I just saw this giant gap, and I was like, like the service right now of like red teaming, is expensive. It's hard to engage with, but it is actually trying to emulate what bad guys are really doing. And so you have all these companies over-indexing on AppSec, and then you have them still getting breached. Big giant companies, right? And how do they get breached? It's credential reuse, like, and so there has to be a middle ground for us to come up with, right? There has to be like this general set of hygiene where you're trying to also protect users and invest in user security as well as invest in AppSec security, getting that really bad cruft out. And so that's the role when you sit in the chair of the CISO, is balancing your program where you're investing your money in your people, how you're protecting your staff and your servers. And so it is a really interesting balance to try to hit. Now, if you're a big company, like a FANG company, you have all the money in the world, and you can throw money at this and people at this, and it becomes easier because you have a lot of money if you have a good leader who can ride this line. But what if you're a mid-market company or like a small mom and pops? Like, how do you balance those two things? Like, you barely have enough money to employ an IT person, right? Like, but you may handle, as a startup or a small to medium business, vast amounts of personal data. Like, look at law firms, right? They're relatively small outfits, but they handle some of the most private data exists. So security is a hard problem. I think writing that line of protecting users and credentials and the kind of like normal way that attackers are kind of breaching sites these days is just as important as the AppSec baking in, technical secure libraries, finding bugs using static analysis, dynamic analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my answers from both sides.
So it's funny. It's actually something I was thinking about while you're kind of bringing that up there too. Talking about when we approach pen testing, I'd love your opinion on this because there's two big ways to see this, right? Do we do it in house or do we contract it out, right? And I don't have a ton of experience within that space because I live deeply in the AppSec world of secure coding and that type of stuff, right?
Yeah.
When we think about this on the kind of that offensive side, pen testing. My biggest concern is having the same in-house team are going to see the same things every time versus if I contract this out, I feel like it might be better, but I also might be wrong. I don't know. I kind of wonder what your opinion on the quality difference you see there versus in-housing it versus contracting it out.
So I think, if I were to walk into a company tomorrow, where I had, a healthy but limited budget, I would balance it just like I've said, right? I think I would spend, not a majority, but like a large section of my budget on internal AppSec program, a security champion program. One of the things I learned really early on in my leadership journey was that also, and we referenced it earlier, is that a security program which just comes in and says, don't do this thing, and then leaves and drops off a report is not a super effective security program. And so, I talked about security engineering programs, which was an arm of what we put together at Ubisoft, which was a strike team of people that had both those skill sets we were talking about earlier. They're both security people and they can develop. And, we had multidisciplined kind of jack of all trades people on that team who, if a development team really needed help with like a big architecture change or some kind of code change, or they were just behind on remediating, like a large swath of vulnerabilities, we could apply a security engineering strike team to kind of help them and deploy with them. But not everybody has that. And so, these days in this financial context, I would probably outsource the testing because there's a lot of good testing shops out there. I mean, we run one. I count ourselves among, some of the really great consultancies out there. I think though, even pen testing has been, and application scanning has been diluted a lot, right? Like that field, you can buy different branded services, but really at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're running a tool, in the back end, right? And so you'll get a lot of people who will say, oh yeah, we're doing a pen test, but really they're doing a vulnerability assessment with the scanner. And you'll get a lot of people who say we're doing a red team engagement, but really they're doing a pen test. And we've had this like kind of dilution of the terms and what they mean. And yeah, it's so you really got to make sure that if you're going to outsource that work, you go with a reputable company who has reputable engineers, who's doing cool research in the space that you want them to execute in. And there's plenty of places like that are around. So if I'm dropping into a new company, I am going to invest internally on security engineering, AppSec, security champions program, and I'm going to invest in table stake stuff like endpoint protection and email filtering, because you have to reduce the amount of initial access vectors for actual bad guys. And then your biggest spend is actually I'm going to spend on FIDO keys, right? Like FIDO keys are one of my main defenses for the users. So I've got a little bit of my application and product protected from the big stuff. I've got my users protected to a good extent, and then I'm farming out testing to an external shop, usually a good one, that's going to really give me the adversary look from the outside. I think that's how I would architect a new company's security program, had I have the budget for all of those.
And then there's that key word, had I had the budget for all of it, right? But
yeah.
I love that perfect picture kind of setup scene, right? Because the idea is just because you're not there yet, right, doesn't mean that's not what you start building out for to eventually get at, right? The hope is always to grow to what you want to be, right? Just the job you want, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I wear the hoodie because I want to stay hacker, so.
Yep, that's it. And
Yeah.
there's the key, right? As long as you're
Yep.
wearing a hoodie, you got all
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
watch defensive security,
Yeah.
hoodie up.
Yeah.
I'm
There you
offensive
go.
security.
Offensive
Now I'm
security.
defensive
Yes.
security.
Yes. That's funny.
So, kind of tying back into this, we're talking about the offense, we're talking about tools, and here's one of the things that the way I think I set up a lot of the talk when I think about tools. They're my safety nets, right?
Hmm.
Like the theory is and kind of really most of where we focus all of our stuff is safety nets, right? It's our tools are supposed to catch things that we made mistakes on or we missed, right? And then when we do our later thing, when we're actually doing our pen testing, bug bounty programs, and all this other thing we're having manual, theoretically now people are going in and trying to find the things our tools missed, right?
Yeah.
But in the end there, that we're talking about a lot of layers of big safety nets where the biggest capture, right, is like how do we stop that going down? And that goes back into the power of security champion programs, the power of training and investing on individuals so that we're reducing the lift the rest of the way down the pipeline,
Yeah.
rather than waiting until it gets down there and then be like, all right, well, now let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's already been down the pipeline. The hope is, ideal scenario, that we stop it from getting there anyways. That's for like the 80%, right? There's the 20% that's just gonna we're talking 0 days, we're talking other things that there's nowhere in our radar, right? That we'll
Yeah.
eventually just have to just kind of find out as we go along.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's layers to AppSec. And I don't know if many trainers or people talk about the human layer, which is, actually layer 0 for a lot of these programs, right? And it is champions or security conscious developers. It is, something I've been harping on, like writing in a framework that handles vulnerability, security vulnerabilities really well, like has input, validation, output, and coding, right? Like those are the two tenets of, like security basically is all the vulnerabilities take place via input. And then if they make it past input, they're executed via, contextual output in an application. So, well, not all vulnerabilities, but I would say maybe 80 or 85%. But yeah, so picking the right framework to develop your application in, and then if you can't do that, picking secure libraries that do the things you want them to do to protect you against vulnerabilities and still provide you the functionality that you need. And in order to even get to that stage, which is I would say stage 1, you have to have security conscious people who can do that research, right? And so that's part of the security champions work with the security team is like let's build those safety rails, and then you move on to your tools, and then you're like, okay, so we've baked this in at the human level, we've tried to design things, we've done threat modeling, now we're moving on to static analysis, or some kind of code analysis tool, and then after code analysis you have a layer of automated dynamic scanning, and then after dynamic scanning you have a manual person come in to do testing, and that might be an internal person or just someone using some of the more manual tools like Burp Suite or Zap or something like that. And then after that you have an external expert come in and validate your code via testing. And so I think those are the layers that you go through, but the more layers that you start with at the foundation of that triangle, the less you have at the end funnel of the triangle, or at the tippy top, right? The less you're hitting those big vulnerabilities there, because there's just been so many gates to flow through to find the bad stuff. And so yeah, I mean, I think that it all starts with the human layer, right? I think that there is a very brittle security or product security program without the human layer, pretty much. So
It's one of the things when you think about all those things, start adding all those layers together, right? And a lot of the pushback you might get from an organization might be, okay, well, what if we're agile, right? We got to be pushing code out every day, a dozen times a day, right? How can I have all these blockers and still kind of operate at that agile speed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is a valid question. Development moves at breakneck speeds. With very scoped pieces of work nowadays. I think that you don't have to fix things exactly when you find them. So you have all these layers identifying different vulnerabilities, right? And it takes a discerning security champion or security team to really understand the real risk of a vulnerability. If it's reachable from the public, first of all, is a lot of trap that a lot of people fall into. They'll get output from these tools or their people on a vulnerability class, and then to later realize that that code path or that was so deeply embedded in the application or not even accessible in their product. They wasted time remediating it in the cycle. So you have to have someone who has a discerning eye to understand what is really risky, and to prioritize your backlog of security issues and sprinkle it over your development cycle in Agile. And so you're not in the beginning of your program and your product, you're going to find a lot, right? You're going to find more and more. But as time goes on, and designing a layered security program or product security program or security engineering program to enable your product, as time goes on, you will see less and less critical. So there's not a lot of things that need to be fixed right now. And you see this with general software development too, product launches, right? When we launched a game, the first, at Ubisoft, the first month, there's a lot of bugs, and some of them are game breaking, and some of them lock players out from playing. And it's like, the first couple of months are going to be hard, and so you allocate larger portions of the operation team, you allocate more engineers, but as time goes on, you stabilize, you're able to prioritize, you're able to fit these things into the work pieces that you need them to fit into, and but you have to have that person, like I said, who has the discerning eye for risk rating, the vulnerabilities.
So I was actually at a Gartner conference recently. One of the things I think there's a catchphrase I threw out with one of my talks that captures this, and it straight says, "Don't break the build." Right? As a security person, it's not my job to break the build.
Yeah.
Like if I break the build over every small alert or little thing that pops up on a scanning tool, I'm going to have a room full of developers that are ready to just get rid of me. We'll just say that nicely, right?
Not just developers, business executives are going to come after you, right? Like, this is something that we're transitioning away from, which I really like in security, is this idea of the offensive security people, them being seen, or them coming in as cowboys and just like wanting to break everything. In fact, one of the stories I have is working for a company where I was helping them with security leadership, and they had a person on that team who was very, very adversarial to the business and the developers, and definitely saw themselves as this cowboy hacker person who wanted to break everything. And although I love that vibe, I am that person, right? I do love breaking things. I do love the creativity that goes into hacking. We are not that anymore. We are trying to help our companies, right? Our businesses. We are part of the mission. And so, even if you find a ground-breaking bug, your security engineer, offensive security engineer person these days shouldn't be throwing it in your face, making you feel bad about it, just dropping it off and leaving. The full scope, offensive security person these days is helping you remediate. They're on the call with you as soon as they find it to help the business get better faster, right? Like, it is just a different mindset than what what a lot of offensive security people grew up with, or people told them this job was, right? Like, you just get to play a hacker all day, and that is not where we are anymore, and it's not where we should be. And development is appreciating it more as we evolve into more shades of purple. I love purple teaming. I think that having both defensive and offensive capabilities, it's so interesting. Like finding the attack that I find and then trying to figure out how to fix that at a wide scale inside of an organization, especially if it's a corporate software issue, or it's like some esoteric, language I don't know personally or whatever. Like, I think it's great research, and it makes me a well-rounded security engineer. And so I love that we're moving towards this. I think we will need to move towards it a little bit faster, but that's my little story there. And then eventually that person basically got pushed out of the company when they developed a real product security group, security champions program. They built a developer-friendly security program, and that there's no room for that mindset if you can't evolve. So.
Yeah, and that's actually going to lead me into some of my final questions. One of the things that I've been really harping on this year has been like the bridging the divide. I think it's a common theme. We saw a lot of that even at RSA too. Is the idea is how do we come together as a group? It's no longer an us versus them within our own internal organizations, right?
Yeah.
And actually one of the things I like to call it specifically, security is your developers are the largest part of your security team. And the reason I say that is because the developers are the ones building the security controls. The developers and architects are the ones architecting the actual application. They're the ones making decisions and writing the code. I'm not going in and writing input validation for them, right?
Yeah.
They're doing the work.
Yeah.
They are the largest part of your security team. You need to enable them and empower them to fill that role, right? So the question I've been asking every guest kind of near the end of our conversation was, if given the best opportunity, how would you give the advice between a security team and development team to best kind of meet in the middle and bridge that divide?
In my opinion, its visibility is the secret sauce. So I'll give you a story. So at one of the organizations I worked with, we had an incident, and prior to me onboarding to this company, the way that the security team handled the incident was just to handle it internally. They were very secretive about, kind of what happened in the incident, the technical details. They would do all of the investigation themselves, maybe contract with an external party to help them do the investigation, but then they would parse all of the action items themselves about what needed to get fixed, and then go out to the development teams and say, hey, you have to fix this. And this happened for 10 years at this company. And what we did when I came on, in one of the iterations, and I was like, hey, let's try something a little bit different. So from the very beginning of the incident, we included all of the development teams in the process of understanding what our incident process was, understanding exactly what our engineers are doing. They didn't want to do it themselves. They weren't trying to come in and change anything, but giving them the visibility of here's what the detection, response, eradication lifecycle looks like. Here's who we're engaging externally. Microsoft, Mandiant, one of these companies, to help us. Here's where they're looking. Here's our update every day. You can have any development representative leader can come to the daily update on the incident. And then when we did the incident out brief, when it was ready, even the alpha version of it, we invited all of the tech staff for this company to let them know what had happened, to let them know what we had found out, to let them know what the external person had found out. We put it into a presentation, and we held an hour-long Q&A. And this completely changed the culture of the security program in one meeting. All of the technical people showed up. They were all very interested in what had happened. They all took the lessons learned from the incident and baked it into their own process to make sure it didn't happen in their own product. And this was a company that had 40 products. So they had many development teams, many operations teams. They raved about being included in the process to understand what was happening. Some of them came to us after, wanted to learn more about security and how they could do better in their development organizations. How could we get a champion? How can we talk more with the security group? We wish we talked more with you guys to understand this stuff. So I think visibility and communication is the magic sauce to a lot of this stuff. And you can do it without an incident. You can do it with tabletops. You can do it with threat modeling. You can do it with this champions program. You can do it by opening up your doors to your Confluence and Jira to understand what the process is for security assessment, security programs. You can invite them to your team meetings, your outings, your team building exercises, invite the development leads. This is how you build security culture inside of an organization.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that. So this is kind of coming down to the episode. I want to say thank you, Jason, for jumping on, having an amazing conversation. I think our audience has got a whole lot out of that, so I really appreciate you giving me your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great, and maybe I'll be back again sometime for talk about AI or something.
Oh, I feel like all sorts of conversations we could have.
Yeah.
All right, well, to our audience, thank you guys for jumping on and listening to another episode of Security Champions Podcast. Make sure you guys come back out where I'll talk to more security experts about security champion programs, pretty much anything security we find interesting. So, kind of final note, remember, security is a journey, not a destination.